talked about it in letters, and we talked about it on the phone. But how you really feel about it, I don't really know.
What's your take on Cassavetes? 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 Misogynist. Genius. Misogynist. Genius. Misogynist. Genius. Misogynist. Genius. What's your take on Cassavetes? What's your take on Cassavetes? What's your take on...
Welcome to There's Sometimes a Buggy, Irresponsible Opinions About Classic Film, Back to School Edition, 2020. I'm Elise.
I'm Dave. Yes, this is a special subject, an unusual special subject for our show because each of us has chosen one of the components of the episode. Usually it's one person's choice or the other. Here we have gone halves on it.
Well, I really wanted to do Damsels in Distress. I thought we could do that for a back to school, and then we needed something to pair it with, and you have been talking about this movie.
Yes.
This Heckerling movie.
Right, so I guess we'll just dive right into it. It's Damsels in Distress, Whit Stillman and Amy Heckerling's Loser from 2000. And we're going to start with the earlier film.
Well, I'm having a milestone tomorrow, right?
Yeah.
Recording the day before my 45th birthday. And today I realized, I went to my online banking, and I realized that I could become student debt free.
Very exciting
Which
news.
in my case, because I live simply, is entirely debt free.
Yeah, that's pretty impressive.
So I wiped it out. I wiped out the last of my student line of credit the day before turning 45.
Hopefully Dora will be in the same position when she's 45.
Yeah, I never had to do quite as much as what Dora had to do, but then I didn't go to any fancy universities. McGill was sort of fancy, but not like going to school at a good New York university is fancy, even though, of course, the movie does not actually
Well, it does.
take place in New York.
Yeah, it does. It takes place in New York, and some of it's filmed in New York.
But the romantic montage is largely, we could identify many Toronto landmarks,
Yeah.
which we're now capable of doing. I mean, there are many so-called New York movies that are actually at least in part filmed in Toronto, but I would never have known it before moving here.
Clearly, there are some shots where they're in Washington Square, which is near Greenwich Village, or in Greenwich Village, near NYU. So they kind of split time on this, obviously, and they did a lot of maybe longer shots in Toronto because it was a cost-saving measure.
Apparently the video store is Review Video. I don't even know if that existed still by the time I came to Toronto in 2012. I've been inside some Queen videos, but I don't think I ever went to Review Video.
No, me neither. Suspect Video was another really famous one. You have a very clear shot of Lee's Palace on Bloor, which is only a 5-minute walk from our house.
Yeah, that's true. That's how you spotted it.
A music venue, yeah. And the museum, I think a lot of it seemed like the AGO anyway.
That's enough Toronto talk.
So let's talk about Loser. This is a film, came out in 2000. This was pretty much the absolute peak of not of my movie-going life, because that's been the past couple of years, going to TIFF like 200 times a year, although of course that all came crashing to a halt in March 2020. But in the late 90s, when I was doing my bachelor's degree at Concordia, in between classes, I would go to the $2 movie theater on St. Catherine Street, the Palace, and I saw at least 100 new movies, in 98, 99, 2000. Each year I would see tons. This is one that I certainly had no great hopes for, but I emerged from it really, really loving it. And I've always kept a warm thought for it in my heart. I know it's universally reviled or near universally reviled, and I've never understood it, and I wanted to see how Elise would react.
Well, the way you were talking about it as being a movie in which everyone except Jason Biggs the main, like the lead character, is a date rapist made me, and the fact that Heckerling directed Fast Times at Ridgemont High made me expect a movie that was going to be very sexual and very nasty in tone.
Oh no,
It's very sweet. It's a very sweet movie.
but most of the characters are brutal fuckers.
Yeah, but I just wasn't expecting the tone.
And it's actually really more about Mina Suvari's character.
I am not the first person to notice that, because the internet lets me know that I'm not the first person to notice that kind of the way that she transposed Jane Austen's Emma to a teen movie modern setting with Clueless. This is obviously a transposition of The Apartment.
Somewhere between The Apartment and a Capra movie, right? Where again, like we were saying about Jean Arthur, like the character that has a lot more pull for us as viewers is the female character, and the male character is just like a wonderful guy.
Yeah, a wonderful guy who bizarrely does not report his roommates for date rape drugging girls at the university.
We can talk about that.
So I was a little bit underwhelmed.
Yeah?
I did feel like the only review I bothered looking up was Ebert's, and he basically said the characters aren't particularly well drawn and the plot isn't very believable. And I agree with both of those things. The plot is bad. Like, the characters do things that don't make any sense just in order for the plot to work.
You think?
Definitely.
Like what?
Well, we'll talk about it.
Yeah.
We'll get into it. And the characters are not very interesting or deep or believable either.
Oh, I love Mina Suvari's character. I think it's...
Well, the two lead actors are charming.
No, but I think she's a really interesting character.
No, I don't understand why she starts sewing buttons all of a sudden for the professor. I don't get that at all. So that's really all Ebert says in his review, but that's not really enough to justify 2 out of, 4 stars? I guess he gave 4 stars to things?
I don't know. I've never really been an Ebert reader.
So the amount of hostility for this film, or even just harshness of reviews, can't just be about the fact that it's got some problems with characters and plotting. So I assume that some of it does have to do with the sexual content that Ebert doesn't even bother to mention, and that can add to my list of why it's a problem that there are not only, but most prominent reviewers are men of typical fare movies anyway.
Honestly, I feel like this movie is more relevant in 2020 than it's ever been. It's way ahead of its time.
He clearly is either completely uninterested in this content or doesn't know how to talk about it.
Yeah, maybe that's the case.
But I also I went on the IMDb entry for it, and Heckerling attributes its failure to something that is, again, a real problem, I think, with the movie, a genuine problem with the movie that explains a lot to me in terms of why it didn't totally work for me, which is that she wanted it to be another R-rated movie.
Right.
And the studio wouldn't let her. So it was fucked by the studio. The producers or whoever, whatever you call it now when they make movies.
I don't know. How much more horrific do the characters can they even get?
Well, for one thing, how does Mina Suvari figure out she's been roofied and not get a rape kit? Like, that is completely dropped. And when she's not shown in any kind of compromising position that would suggest that she was raped, even though that's obviously where the scene is going.
No, okay, well, I guess that is where the R comes in, right? So the plot intervenes to make it so that she passes out so completely.
But that's what they're waiting for her to do, so it doesn't make any sense. What happens makes no sense. No sense at all. And her reaction, her non-reaction to it makes no sense.
Right.
That's a really big problem there in the middle of the movie, and it kind of irritates me. We've been watching a lot of pre-codes. Okay, you could do a lot of stuff in a pre-code, actually. But when the pre-code needs to do more than you can even do in a pre-code, directors and writers find skillful ways to suggest infinitely nasty things without necessarily leaving this kind of giant plot hole. So I feel like if she wanted to, she could have found a way to make that all go a little more smoothly, but who knows how they interfered, at what point they interfered.
I don't know. To me, the point was delivered crystally clear anyway, that a woman who goes into that kind of setting is in a great deal of danger. Yes, it's true that they didn't depict it as graphically or as
traumatizing or anything.
But it's traumatizing to me watching it. It's true, maybe they didn't torture the character as much as they would have in an R film, but if you're a viewer taking all of that in, you are definitely getting a sense of an incredibly dangerous social setting that these people are trying to navigate.
Another problem I had was, well, I already mentioned one, which is that Jason Biggs is supposed to be the nicest guy ever in the history of the world, and yet he doesn't report his roommates for drugging girls and raping them.
Well, look, she's trying to make him, again, this is where I think it gets into Capra territory. He's not really a character. She is a character. He is not a character. He is a paragon of some sort, right? So he's not necessarily going to do all of the things that you should do in reality, because he's trying to make him exemplify a bunch of things that don't even make sense. Like,
absolutely. And that's very different from Jack Lemmon's character in The Apartment, who is compromised and has to make a lot of moral calls. And, well, I mean, I guess you could say this is an example of Jason Biggs making a moral call and not making the right one. But still, it just doesn't work with the rest of his idealized character.
Well, he's caught up in the idea that he also does not snitch, right? That's part of being a paragon, right? That's why he doesn't report the professor either.
Well, that's okay. And then the whole thing with the professor, first of all, that character...
And Greg Kinnear.
...was so thrown under the bus that he doesn't even work for me as a villain.
He's really
he's
enjoying
all over the
playing
place.
that character, though.
He's like really all over the place as a character, and again seems to be doing just whatever the plot at the moment is requiring him to do, instead of making sense. Like the Fred McMurray character in The Apartment isn't particularly believable either, but he makes sense as a social criticism. This professor was just too broadly drawn for that for me.
I agree. I
also,
mean,
it would have been so much more interesting, and I'm sure this is stuff that she would have liked to get into if she could have made any movie that she wanted to. The idea that he's even a tenured professor who is this much of a hotshot academic, that he would even actually be in academic jeopardy over sleeping with students is probably false, especially at this time period.
Well, as he was saying, the thing that lends it
let
even
alone
more...
that he would go to jail at the end of the movie for sleeping with a minor, never happened.
No, that would happen. If you have sex with a minor and you get charged with it.
Since when have you ever heard, like he'd make a plea bargain or something, but since when have you ever heard of a hotshot New York professor going to jail for sleeping with a minor?
No, I don't know.
Exactly.
No, I don't think, again, I don't think that realism is the goal here. I think they're trying to go for a maximum sense of emotional and physical jeopardy for the Dora character.
Well, I think it's just interesting to have a movie, a teen movie, or a college movie introducing these topics, particularly at the time.
It's a real sucker punch, too, right? Because it's Jason Biggs, fresh off being the central figure in American Pie.
And Mina Savari right after American Beauty. It makes you wonder how this movie could possibly fail. It had to be the content. It had to be the dark content.
We're going... Well, I don't know about people who came to it after American Beauty. Who knows what those people like or
I don't think this.
But American Pie, they obviously were expecting for it all to be a little bit less aggressively painful.
Well, yeah, and American Beauty, you know, Mina Savara's character was a real have your cake and eat it too conceit, because Kevin Spacey is obsessing the whole movie about having sex with an underage girl and then doesn't even actually go for it in the end.
Well, but that's supposed to be his heroic moment.
Yeah, that's just stupid.
I don't like
either
that
they should have
movie
got
at
it
all.
on, or that this plot should never have been introduced. Like, it was just stupid. Anyway, she's this idealized object, sex object in that movie as a teenage girl. It's all about objectifying teenage girls. And so, I mean, the audience that went for that is probably not going to go for what happens in this movie. Certainly, I haven't seen a lot of Mina Savari movies, but certainly this is the most I've ever seen her being allowed to play a character who's not...
I think she's really terrific in this movie. I'm not really sure about how the rest of her career has gone. I don't think it's gone
very
that well.
I don't know what's happened to Jason Biggs either, for that matter.
Well, we saw him in early seasons of Orange is the New Black.
That's right. That's the last time
I
love his lesbian hair for most of this movie. He looks like a very pretty lesbian and has basically the same haircut I had in my early 20s.
I actually like Jason Biggs a lot in this movie, doing
he's so likable.
What he's asked to do, and also in anything else, which is great. I think that's one that people were starting to champion before Woody Allen became someone that no one wants to champion. But I think it's a really good early 2000s Woody Allen movie with Jason Biggs and Christina Ricci.
So I've stated my mixed feelings about the film, some of my criticisms. Why don't you give us your pitch for it? Because you clearly have done some thinking about it.
Well, we should lay it out, I think. What is it about for people who maybe didn't get a chance to see it or don't know how to get a hold of it? I had it on DVD, but we don't have a DVD player anymore. I had to buy it off of Google, so I guess you can do that or rent it. The way it was marketed too, right? It seems like maybe it's going to be an Adam Sandler type movie. It's a clueless guy thrown into a fish out of water situation in New York City at a university.
Yeah, he's sort of like, Jason Biggs is a little bit like an upscale-ish Adam Sandler.
I think that that's what they were playing on at the time, for sure.
He even does a Jerry Lewis pratfall at one point.
But it kind of starts out differently, even, in the first few minutes. Just, he has like this pep talk, although that's also playing on the American Pie thing, because in that movie, he's got those pep talks with Eugene Levy, his dad. Here we've got another comedy legend, Canadian comedy legend.
A lot of comedy legend cameos in this, as well as teen movie sightings.
Yeah, so Dan Aykroyd is the dad who gives him good life advice, I think, which is that if you want to get along with people,
listen.
Be interested in them.
Yeah,
now,
that doesn't pan out.
No, the advice actually kind of backfires for 99% of his encounters. It only works with Dora, really.
All he needs. I loved the scene where he's dancing with his little sister.
Yeah, it's great.
Which already sets him up as, this is just the perfect guy, but he's not very cool.
Yeah, he's a goofy kid from rural Wisconsin. He's a scholarship student, full scholarship. He doesn't have the money to be in this environment any other way, so he's got a lot of pressure on him to keep grades up, and he's never been to New York. He has no idea what he's doing or what he's in for.
And he has a dumb Fargo hat. Where I was from, the Canadian prairies, in the 90s anyway, I think it was the 90s, those hats were cool. Dave is just, I didn't know that was going to make Dave laugh his ass off. I had no idea. No, everybody wore those hats. All the guys wore those hats.
Yeah.
Girls were wearing those hats. It's cold in Saskatchewan, Manitoba. They're all confused in my head now. I went to school in both places.
Yeah, well, they're all the Canadian equivalent of rural Wisconsin.
Yeah, but that's what you wore in the big city.
So he gets to New York, and he's
You weren't wearing those hats in Montreal, I take it.
No.
Okay.
Well, I don't know. People probably did, but I certainly never had one.
I never had one either.
I was not a cool guy.
Actually, I might have had one at one point. Let's go on.
He gets there. He immediately gets thrown in with 3 of the worst people ever committed to celluloid.
Oh yeah, I meant to look up if I recognize them.
Well, one of them was in the robot TV show.
The robot TV show? Which one?
Westworld. In the first season, which is the only season I watched, he has a major role in that, and I recognized him from this. He looks kind of like, the 21st century James Spader.
Okay, sure.
And I think he often has played characters like that. I mean, this is sort of a James Spader type role, although there are 3 of him in this movie.
I thought I recognized one of them, the other one, Tom Sadowski, from other teen movies of the same general time period, but I was incorrect. This was his first movie.
Now, she cast these guys. She obviously went and got all 3 of them as neophytes and threw them in there to be just the worst assholes ever, and they certainly are. One of the things I do like about the film is that it casts a large shadow, because they certainly don't think of themselves as villains. They're just exemplars of a type that exists in great numbers.
They're just kind of annoying jerks.
And rapists.
Yes, exactly. It's just kind of part of being an annoying jerk. Whereas, it would have been almost better if the professor hadn't been played as such a under-the-bus villain in the latter half of the movie, because these guys aren't. I guess it gets pretty broad toward the end when they're blackmailing him and coming up to her and...
Well, I don't know. That all seems of a piece. They don't see what's wrong with what they're doing. These are the ethics they have learned as 1%ers
well, yeah.
on a free ride at college.
Sure, and they're just going to lie and cheat their way through college and through sex and everything else.
Yeah. And of course, the movie has Old Testament morality about this in its what happened to them follow-up epilogues. Each of them winds up in jail or completely fucked by some aspect of what they're doing.
Well, yeah,
that's not what happens in real life.
Like a Scorsese ending.
Yeah.
What happens to all the gangsters.
They all get shot at different times. They all actually get in trouble for what they've done in this movie, and that, of course, is just wishful thinking.
Yeah, definitely.
Certainly in 2000, it was wishful thinking, and it still is now, I think. Greg Kinnear, well, we'll talk about him a little bit later, I think. That's the setup. He's got these 3 evil roommates, and he doesn't fit in, and he's just trying to get by and hoping to make friends. We do see a montage that is kind of the only thing that is like what I was expecting when I walked into the theater, which is that everyone thinks he's a loser and walks away from him because he's just too earnest.
Yeah. When he tries to do the complicated fist bump that he's never seen before, that was pretty adorable.
Yeah, I think that was probably in the commercials. Things start to change considerably when we slow down and we meet him in a literature class where he sits next to Mina Suvari. She actually notices what's going on with him when he falls. Everyone else just laughs. And of course the professor, Greg Kinnear, labels him Jerry Lewis. But she actually puts some ice on it. And
which seems to be turning him on.
Well, sure. I guess there's a girl you find attractive
touching
next
your
to you.
knee, sort of.
It's nice. Familiarity. This is the only nice person he has met. And basically the only nice person he will meet in this movie.
Yes, and she is also poor.
They have a lot in common. Now, she doesn't have a scholarship.
But she was accepted.
Yeah.
So she had decent grades.
Oh yeah, obviously. Very good grades. And she's brilliant, right? Find out later that she is dating this professor. It's all surreptitious.
We'll find that out pretty quickly.
Yeah. She does his grading for him. And all kinds of other tasks for him, and that's going to get worse and worse as time goes by.
Yeah, that's all the stuff I didn't like. There are ways to make this relationship seem not good. In fact, it seems that way from the beginning without laying all that extra stuff on it.
Well, you know, I think it's just following out a trend. And this idea of a professor dating a young girl and respecting them enough in some ways to make them do all their work for them. I've actually met people who have done that.
Well, yeah, but this one is not even going to give her overt credit for anything.
Well, no, that's what I'm saying. I know someone in the 90s, she was 40 years younger than he had her do all his grading for him.
Sure, but this is a system.
She was like 20.
This is a system where your TAs should not be doing your fucking grading for you. Like, it is an exploitative system in and of itself, and the higher up you go in the hierarchy of universities, the worse the exploitation.
Yeah, but she's not a TA.
Of the students. Yeah, but you can easily, she's a student, so you can easily, like, elide that into the same kind of exploitation and hierarchy.
He's already making her do all his chores.
Well, maybe this
for him.
is the world that Amy Heckerling, being older than the character she's writing about, comes from, where it was commonplace for everybody. Even if you're Susan Sontag, who married before she was out and about as a lesbian, married her professor, and apparently wrote his book for him, and did not receive credit.
Right.
Because there was going to be a custody battle and a divorce, so she eschewed credit. Anyway, that's what the latest Pulitzer Prize winning biography says.
Oh boy.
Yeah, so it didn't really matter how brilliant or liberated you were as a young woman. This is the kind of relationship that you would get into if you were going to be involved with a professor, at least a lot of the time. I'm not saying this happened to everybody, but probably a general rule. Again, it kind of just struck me as odd for someone of Suvari's generation to be involved in that kind of dynamic.
Well, she's our generation, and I know someone that got involved in that exact dynamic.
Did she sew his buttons
No.
make tea for him?
No, I think that is an extrapolation from some of these other things,
Yes.
right? But the idea there behind all of this is that he understands that she's probably the smartest student in the class, and he is willing to allow her to just do all his work for him, his academic work, but he still doesn't think of her as a person, really, right? That's the incredible dichotomy there, that there's just no way for him to think of her as a person because she's a woman, basically. I don't think that he probably has any feelings beyond that for any women. It doesn't seem like it.
Sure. Now, obviously, that doesn't have to be a general rule.
No, of course not.
Know of personally and through biography or what have you of plenty of professor-student relationships that had problematic inequalities, but they were certainly love-based and respect-based.
Again, this is the worst-case scenario. Everyone in this movie is a worst-case scenario version of a real thing that happens.
Here's the thing, though. I want to say that if you're dating a student, by the time this movie is made in 2000, if you're dating a student who's in your class, you're a sociopath.
Yeah, well, he is, obviously.
But I'm sure that happened quite commonly and even resulted in marriage.
Yes, it
for
did.
A long time.
It's emblematic of something that is real.
Yeah, I just want to say that it's not just about gender. Looking at the university as a place of exploitation is not just about gender. It's
No,
also
of course not.
about economic exploitation and social hierarchies, and the movie does bring those things in there too.
It
so
does.
It's valid to think about them all together.
We get some great little scenes, some vignettes of Mina Savari's struggles to find some way to afford all of this, and it's put very blatantly by the loan officer or the financial officer who just tells her, look, some people who get accepted to this school can't actually come here. Sorry. That's how it works.
This is only occurring to me now as we talk about it, but part of his reason for not being able to accept her may be economic, because there's this...
Yeah, he
the thing
thinks
that
of her as
happens-
suburban trash.
Yeah, the thing that happens, and so do the date rapists.
Yes.
Toward the end of the movie, he's actually dealt with having feelings for her to the extent that he's going to take her home to his parents, but he can't ever do that, not just because she's young and his student, but because, his parents are wealthy.
Again, this is not every professor. This is a specific class-based critique. This is a very wealthy young professor who comes from an elite stratum of society. That's not every professor.
Making us understand him is in that scene where he says, even I can't be myself with my parents.
Exactly. No, I think that's very nice shorthand as he smugly tries on his Armani suit or whatever it is. And he says, no, obviously you can't wear expensive clothes. It just doesn't work. We'll take you somewhere that's more your style, as he tries to find some way to pass her off.
So even if he did decide to marry her, and he seems to kind of be working toward that, does she want to be made over like Vertigo, or?
No, obviously not. There's so many warning signs, and she is gradually coming unstuck from this fixation throughout the film. It's not like some movies where she likes him right up until one thing is revealed. No, it's very clear she wanted desperately to try this out and live with him. But as soon as she gets there, she hates it. She's stuck with this cell phone. He's calling her constantly and getting her to pick things up. She obviously doesn't like it. And she is trying very hard to reconnect with Jason Biggs. And he's got his own issues. He doesn't like being friend-zoned or whatever. Or he just can't deal with it. I mean, he's much nicer about it than most of the usual nice guy friend-zone kind of movies.
Well, he really screws things up in a boneheaded, frustrating way when he covers for the professor, because at that point, when Alcott doesn't pick her up from the hospital because he's afraid, that's the apartment reference, he's afraid to get involved with drugs and dying girls and things like that for his career. As soon as he doesn't pick her up, if Jason Biggs just let her find that out, it would have been over.
No, but he can't. If it's in his power to prevent her from being hurt, he will do it. And actually, Jack Lemmon does the same thing. He tells lies.
Yeah, but he's covering for his boss.
Well, okay, sure.
It's a little more complicated.
But he's also trying to smooth things over for Shirley MacLaine and make her feel less terrible about the stupid relationship she's been in, right? Which is the same scenario here. The rest of it kind of develops pretty much the way you would think. I mean, they become friends.
I'm surprised worse things did not happen to the animals at that party, that's all. They were really holding back there, too.
Yeah, but again, they really tease you with the thought that there's going to be a mass animal death.
Yeah, it's kind of like the girls and the animals are all in the same
jeopardy.
Category.
They're all in jeopardy, but yes, because I guess it's supposed to be for all or PG or whatever it was.
Nobody gets hurt.
Nobody gets
on screen,
maimed for life or killed. It's
or
pretty
traumatized.
Close. But you know that off screen, someone's getting raped in all of those party scenes.
And there might be bestiality happening too.
Yeah.
We do see a girl being put on the animal operating table in the background. That happens.
Yeah. Of course, I readily admit that this movie was designed specifically to appeal to someone like me. It's got these Capra-esque touches. Well, just like this interesting use of a bait and switch protagonist structure where you think it's going to be about this one person who's coming from outside the system, and it really isn't. It's about someone who's already inside the system who meets this person from outside of it.
Okay, fair enough.
That's my take on Capra.
Well, I mean, it probably is a conscious or unconscious Mr. Smith, Mr. Deeds reference, the way it's set up. I even thought about that.
I feel like it has to be, but it's very skillful.
Mr. Biggs goes to New York University or Columbia or whatever it's supposed to be.
Yeah, I mean, it's very skillfully done, though, I think. From the ad campaign, from everything I knew going in, I had no idea it was really going to be a story about Mina Savari's character.
The Jean Arthur character always knows how to handle herself better than anyone else in that world, so that's not like this Mina Savari character.
No, because this is a much more vulnerable film. Heck, Heckerling is obviously making a cri de coeur film here. She really invested a lot in writing and directing this movie, I think. She's trying to tell you something really serious about the position that young women are in the milieu that she's investigating. And I don't know, it really impacted me.
And the PG/R thing raises its head again in those nightclub scenes where she, obviously the way it's going is that she's going to sexually compromise herself to make money in some way. And again, we never get that. Although it's almost bad, just her getting fired for not being able to do that is almost as bad as
I
seeing
think that's
that.
better. Fact is, if you want to stay there, you have to make that decision. That seemed very believable too. The management is watching you, and if you are not going to take the steps that are required, they're just going to get rid of you. There's a million other people for that job. Let them have that moral quandary.
Or safety quandary, whatever,
Well,
however you
all
want
of
to
it.
put it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even that scene where the roommates decide to get rid of him, you don't expect it to go the way it does, right? They go to their...
You could never have that scene now with Jason Biggs saying, "Oh yeah, I love making racial slurs. I don't think I'm going to be able to stop."
Yeah, I know, but it feels like a parody of 2020, doesn't it?
A lot of it feels like a parody of 2020.
I think it should be re-released right now. Because, yeah, these three horrible guys...
Although we may never have college campuses again. We may be online from now on.
That's true. They report him to their RA, I guess. That's who that guy is. And...
Or actually, this isn't even date rape in this movie. Sorry.
No, it isn't.
It's just drugging...
Indiscriminately drugging any woman that comes into the room that you're in.
I heard about the roofie rumors, about the one pub in downtown Regina, because it's a very small city, that all of the university students went to. There's this one pub, and you went there and you could pick people up, but I also heard a lot of roofie rumors about it. It wasn't the same kind of place when I was going there. When I was going there as an undergrad, you just sat with your friends and your boyfriend and you ordered food and beer and could safely drink, but it later developed more of a hookup culture thing.
The big set piece is that night where he's seen on her binder Everclear stickers, and he obviously saves his money, hoards it until he's able to buy 2 tickets to Everclear who are coming to town, asks her to go, and she agrees. She's very happy, but she has job interviews because she, as you mentioned, she's been fired from her bar job, strip club job. She has to meet him there, and she happens to run into...
All of this seems so much worse, by the way, like the strip club job and the relationship with the professor, because Mina Suvari looks like she's 12.
She's very small, it's true.
A small person.
She calls herself a nasty little person at one point. She's been rendered that way by lack of funds, she says. And Jason Biggs says, oh, that's why all the nice people are rich, right? Everything goes wrong that night because she happens to run into one of these creeps who knows how to talk like an ally when they need to.
Well, there's a fundraiser. That's what they're saying. There's a fundraiser.
And
I don't know how you would arrive at a party like that and think you were drinking juice.
Well,
I wonder if that's part of the PG thing, that she has to pretend that she thought she was drinking juice. At least let her think she's drinking a beer, for God's sake.
I don't know, it's 8:30 and she's supposed to just hang out there until it's time to go to the concert. Who knows what she thought. But anyway, she didn't think she was going to be rendered unconscious.
I guess it doesn't look like a frat party, considering...
No, it's in a vet.
It's in a vet place with animals all around.
Yeah, it looks pretty cute.
The vet school.
That's my dream party, except for what actually happens there. She never shows up. Jason Biggs sits there by himself at the Everclear concert. Hopefully he enjoyed it. And he comes home and finds her amidst all the debris. She's the only one that nobody even bothered to drag out of there.
He has to take her little body to the emergency room.
There we get a little cameo, one of the lead characters from Fast Times at Ridgemont High, so that's always nice to see the Heckerling verse preserved.
Yeah, she keeps referring back to it in her movies, apparently.
It's a good movie. And that's another one
and I guess that's one where she actually got to make the movie she intended to make.
It was based on Cameron Crowe writings. It's another one that has a bit of a bait and switch. I mean, it does feel, when you go in, that it's just really going to be about these two guys and all of their struggles, but it really winds up being the most impactful stuff happens to Jennifer Jason Leigh in her first role.
Yeah.
The great Jennifer Jason Leigh, greatest living actress.
Okay. Many would agree with you.
This is where their rapprochement begins in earnest. She didn't go to the concert with him, but they get to know each other while she convalesces.
I'm glad they didn't stretch out the thing where one of the guys comes back afterwards and leads him to believe that she took drugs ahead of the party and then she was making out with guys.
No, he never believes that. And even if he
Which
did,
is good.
even if he did, he wouldn't judge her for it because he's a paragon. Right? He never has any negative feelings toward her.
True. He tries to set some boundaries.
But that's just because he's trying to protect himself. But he never has any angry feelings toward her or discounts her humanity no matter what he hears about her.
So then they have their New York cultural tour friendship montage.
Yep.
And my favorite part of it was Jason Biggs getting so excited to see Cabaret on Broadway.
It's really great. It gives you a lot of great moments like that, this film.
She's just looking at him. She's so excited that he's so excited.
I can't believe they have things like this.
He's from the sticks, after all.
Yeah, everything seems to be going splendidly, but at the back of it all, the viewer knows, and Jason Biggs shouldn't forget that she does still have this entanglement that she thinks is a major thing with Greg Kinnear. And just when they're about to reach their crescendo, he goes to rent a movie and get pizza, and he gets advice on the kind of movie to watch from David Spade.
I've been watching a very good long soap opera storyline from the late 80s, early 90s, catching up with some nostalgia for Days of Our Lives. Based on that type of romance writing, you know when he gets this excited about the upcoming date, and he gets the pizza, and he gets the movie, and he gets the video clerk to help him pick the movie, and he gets flowers, you know that's going to end in disappointment.
Yeah, and it does. Because behind the scenes, Greg Kinnear has changed his tune and he's come to claim his Dora, but we find out that it's all because, well, he's been blackmailed by the 3 creepish guys who found out that she listed him as next of kin, so they are going to get A's for their papers, and he figures, well, I may as well get a domestic servant / sex slave for a while. Professor Alcott, he seems to care about his subjects, whatever they are, but all we really see of him is a lot of what we would call mansplaining, as he talks down to Dora about everything they see and do. And she resents it, rightfully, and snaps back at him, but she never can get any leverage with him, unfortunately, because he doesn't care about her. Yep. So it's not going to work. You can't win in that situation.
Now, interestingly, although this is a terrible relationship that she's in, it's never presented as sexually exploitative or traumatic.
No, she is attracted to him. I mean, it's Greg Kinnear. That's what he did at this time. He played either clueless, somewhat lovable jerks like in You've Got Mail, or just complete assholes. He did that a lot in the late 90s, early 2000s.
That's something that's very not of the moment and of the hashtag #MeToo, the way it's been employed on the internet.
She is depicted as someone who has chosen
a terrible relationship with a guy who's a jerk.
She is an adult. Yeah, the movie never acts like she's not responsible for her decision.
No,
so that's wonderful.
They're both shown to have made a poor judgment. His more serious because he is the professional.
Well, yeah.
It's his professional judgment to have done this, and it is very bad.
Yeah, and the other thing is that she made some of her decisions based on expectations she has that are not going to be realized, and he made his decisions based on convenience, really. That's all that comes into it. So she is misguided, but it's not because
he's influenced her with his extraordinary power differential.
No, not at all.
Even though they are shown, in terms of both gender and economics, to have this power differential, it's not depicted as that somehow warping and influencing and mind controlling her sexually.
No, it's not making her incapable of taking responsibility for her actions. What makes her incapable is when she gets roofied.
Yes, exactly.
And that is accurate.
What more shall we say?
I don't know if there needs to be a lot more said. It's really satisfying the way everything comes together. It keeps enough things in the air where you're not exactly sure. You know how it's going to work out, or you're pretty sure, but you don't know exactly what the combination of plot moves will be. Puts it all together, and you get the satisfying reunion at the end, and she moves in to the veterinary hospital with Jason Biggs.
They also rescue a newborn kitten at one point.
Well, yeah, that is a beautiful scene. I definitely have fond memories of a similar scene that happened like that in my home when we had 2 pregnant cats. This is back in 1994. I was not going to school at that time. I was just working. Yeah, one of the cats gave birth while I was at work. and there was a really dangerous situation where one of them was trapped inside that stuff.
Sack, he calls it.
Yeah, the placenta, I guess, is part of it.
Are they each in their own?
Yeah, I
they
think they
own
are.
Placenta?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the thing that comes out, isn't
Yeah.
it? I've never had a kid. I have no idea.
Well, I wasn't there. I was hearing about it at work. A friend of mine came over and performed this rescue that's very similar to what they do in this. I just think it's a really underrated film.
Well, it's definitely underrated.
Yeah.
It didn't all work for me as well as it did for you, but...
Just good romantic comedy, set pieces, and like Capra, I mean, it is intending to make some kind of statement about human possibility, but it really foregrounds that against a terrifyingly fallen society.
Mr. Smith certainly foregrounds this against an equally dark vision.
That's why I think it's Capra-esque. Not in the Capricorn sense, but in the sense that it really brings in the worst possible stuff you can imagine as the backdrop to the optative mood that it has about its central figures.
Well, I like your thesis. I like this idea. I think it probably brings out what works best in the movie, this idea of it kind of marrying Capra and Billy Wilder.
Yeah. And like I was saying, the contrast is really interesting, and they both work so well, but Damsels in Distress takes the most benign view possible of a lot of things that probably need to go away. And that's very common with Whit Stillman, right? That's his signature, is that he is an apologist for everything I think needs to be eliminated in our society.
Less so in this movie than he ever has been before.
I think it's still so kindly disposed towards...
There is a pronouncement at the climax of the movie that this civilization should fall.
Yeah, but he still loves it, and he makes you love it while you're watching it. He makes you feel like, oh, these are just
idiots.
Some misguided guys. They're not villains, you know? Like, obviously, it's just so interesting, the contrast between the types of frat guys that you get in the two movies. Let's move to Damsels in Distress, Elise.
Yeah, even the anal bed trick.
Exactly. Everything
is treated... Actually, that's something that Whit Stillman normally would disapprove of, but even in this movie, that is forgivable. Everything in this movie is forgivable.
So Damsels in Distress. Have we talked about Whit Stillman at all? Didn't we talk about Last Days of Disco a little bit when we saw it at TIFF last year?
Yeah, maybe we did, but who knows if... I don't even know what that episode that was, so
no,
who knows?
Me neither.
We might as well repeat some things for the listeners. So we actually saw Whit Stillman in person on that occasion.
It's true.
No, was that was the Last Days of Disco that he came for, wasn't it?
It was indeed.
He was eccentrically charming, as you might imagine.
Yeah.
Just as you might imagine, like one of his own characters. So you knew about Whit Stillman when I met you. I hadn't seen any of his
I saw
films.
his movies in the 90s, and I did see Damsels in Distress in the theater in 2011. After a long layoff, he made this movie.
You first showed me Last Days of Disco, and I didn't respond to it at all. At all. But then you showed me Damsels in Distress, and I really loved it. And from there, I was able to appreciate his earlier films, and I was shocked to learn that Damsels in Distress had been a total critical failure.
Yeah, again, I'm surprised by that.
And
I came away thinking it was great success.
It was his first movie in many years.
Exactly.
How many years?
13.
Since then, he made a Jane Austen adaptation, which fared better critically. I didn't care for it.
It was good, but not as good as his best films.
Well, it was very perverse, because when I found out he was adapting... I mean, that's something he actually has in common with Amy Heckerling. They both adapted Jane Austen. When I found out he was adapting a work of Austen's Juvenilia, I thought that was, like, absolutely a perfect match, because the earlier you get with her work, the more just plain hysterically funny and eccentric and non-naturalistic it is. Whereas, you know, obviously her later novels are more novelistic and go deeper into the characters psychologically and are more emotional and are more embedded in a social world. But her early work is almost cartoonish in its comedy. Anyway, so I thought that would be a good match for Stillman, but then he turned out to adapt her Lady Susan, which is her most uncharacteristic work she ever wrote.
Right.
Yeah, so I think Clueless is actually my favorite Jane Austen adaptation. I despise most of them and wish the people who'd made them would suffer.
Sure, well, you're a real Jane Austen purist. I've read all of the novels once.
What do you mean a purist? What does that even mean?
I like a lot of the adaptations.
That has to do with bad taste.
Yeah. No, I think that Greg Garson, Laurence Olivier movie is wonderful.
But that's like the least offensive of them. I'm talking about the modern adaptations.
I like Emma with Gwyneth Paltrow, and I really liked Sense and Sensibility, the Ang Lee one.
That one's okay. Sense and Sensibility is okay. The one that makes me want to have apoplexy is the Mansfield Park adaptation, which is disgusting.
Right, I saw that. I don't remember much about it.
Just stupid. Don't bother adapting Mansfield Park if you're going to do a revision that makes it not actually the novel. So, let's talk about this movie.
So this is a showcase for Greta Gerwig.
Right, I think she'd only done one Baumbach.
She was a mumblecore star. But, of course, that's a very limited range of viewers.
Well, so was this.
No, this was a more widely viewed than some of the indie...
You think so?
Yeah, then...
It was a total failure.
Yeah, I know, but it actually was showing in a lot of theaters for a little while. And, like, I don't know, Baghead? Is that what
I don't know anything about mumblecore. I did see Frances Ha. It was okay. I don't need to ever see it again. She is so good in this movie.
Yeah, she's really amazing.
She is incredible. This movie could not exist without her. This is like a performance of comedic genius.
It is. And obviously, the movie is built around her, even though she doesn't seem like she's going to be the main character. Of course, this is another bait and switch, because she is a more interesting and more sympathetic character than the supposed protagonist, who is the friend that they take in. Right?
Normally, when your director's in love with you, as we were talking about in our Runaway Bride episode, that's a good thing for an actress. I'm not sure if that is a good thing in Frances.
It's a good movie, too. I don't mind Frances Ha, but this is a much better film, of course.
I'm just hating on Frances Ha because it got so much attention.
So you think it's a perfect film, or you had said that last time, so do you still feel that way?
Pretty much, yeah.
What do you mean when you say it's a perfect film?
That's a good question,
Because
Dave.
you said it's the only perfect film, possibly? That's a big statement.
That's hyperbole. It's a joke, but I guess it's coming from somewhere. It's divorced, to much greater extent than his earlier films, all of which are comedy of manners and very artificial in the way that the characters behave and in their speech patterns. They still take place in some kind of social reality. This movie is completely divorced from any kind of reality. It creates its own world.
Yeah.
You can say that about other directors. You can say that about Wes Anderson.
Yes.
But I like the world that this movie creates better than most of Wes Anderson's worlds. To kind of zero in on exactly how precise the tone of this film is, how precise it is in its execution of exactly the elusive thing it wants to do. I was thinking of Ronald Firbank the whole time, and then, you remember when we watched it the first time, then Firbank actually gets mentioned about 3/4 of the way through the movie. Stillman tips his hand.
And tips his cap.
So Firbank, so hard. It's going to be hard to talk about the tone of this movie. Firbank is this writer who I came across. In my teens, I was interested in English comedy writers of the 19th and 20th centuries, and in the decadent movement, which I got into through reading about and reading Oscar Wilde initially. And Firbank came up in that context. He was, I believe, early 20th century. Yeah, I think his novels were written in the 19-teens, although I did not look this up in advance of this episode. It's been many years since I read Firbank.
What kind of output are we talking about here?
He was homosexual.
How many novels?
People think, we don't know about active or not, I don't think. I read part of a biography of him by Bridget Brophy. He wrote very short novels. They're almost entirely dialogue. They are extremely stylized, and they're characterized by pages and pages of dialogue of society people without any context, talking about totally inconsequential and sometimes nonsensical things in a stylized manner. Even though he belongs to this whole tradition that is being discussed in the classroom scene, about the dandy tradition in the novel or something, or in literature, that's what the class is called.
Yeah.
Even though he has something in common with all those English comic writers, there's something that is just completely indefinable about what he's doing. And also, there is a deliberate slightness to his novels and his comedy. And so obviously, Stillman is projecting some kind of affinity with Firbank in the way that his own comedies work, and their own deliberate lightness and slightness and inconsequentiality.
In the classroom, they're saying that his superficiality is too superficial to be anything else, or something like that.
Or
it's
unseriousness.
Yeah, that's what they say. His unseriousness
is too unserious. Something like that, yeah.
So it doesn't, according to whoever's making that comment, the unseriousness doesn't manage to become then about serious things. But of course, I'm sure Whit Stillman disagrees, because...
Right, this might be like one of those plants that he puts in his movies, like the Mansfield Park comment in Metropolitan, where the character, presumably with the knowledge of the writer-director, the character gets Lionel Trilling's take on Mansfield Park wrong, but the film itself has the correct take on Mansfield Park.
Right. Yeah, I'm sure that's the case, because this is a very earnest film. I wouldn't call it unserious at all, even though it has a superficial unseriousness.
Well, and I'm not sure if Ronald Firbank's novels do have any earnestness to them, so that may be a divergence.
Because Whit Stillman, I guess do they think of him as a satirist? Because he has a tone that sounds like satire, but it's not. He is not a satirist.
He might be a dandy of some kind.
Yeah.
No, he's not. The problem is that critics, particularly of movies, who are not literary critics, have a very limited range of understanding of comedy. There is a lot more to comedy than slapstick and satire.
He has an ironic tone, but an ironic tone can do a lot of different things. And Whit Stillman is doing a very particular thing, which is somehow emphasizing the wondrousness of the things that it is talking about in a mildly mocking way.
Let's discuss, first of all, who Whit Stillman is, who this oddball is. So he is a guy who went to Harvard, went to the good schools. His father was a liberal Democrat and hated conservatives. And so the story that Whit Stillman...
He's like Alex P. Keaton.
The story that Whit Stillman tells is that he went to university and youthful rebellion against his parents decided that through personally interacting with conservative wealthy students, and he did not consider himself wealthy, although I'm sure he is by our standards.
Yeah.
By interacting with these students, he decided, well, actually, interpersonally, they're very nice. I like them a lot. My father's full of shit, and all of these socialists are full of shit. The socialists are the mean ones. They're the ones who are always attacking everybody. All these perfectly nice conservatives. And so that personal psychological rebellion was joined with Stillman's own love of past cultural things, his own cultural nostalgia, that he felt somehow he equated this in his head with you had to be politically conservative in order to like things from the past.
Yeah, well...
So he's a confused, just like Capra, he's a really politically confused guy, but aesthetically, I don't have any problem with him.
No, I love his movies, and I hate his politics,
You almost have to be a conservative to write in this particular... Oscar Wilde was not, so it's not a hard and fast rule, but generally speaking, to write in this style, you almost have to be.
Yeah, probably. Or to want to do this.
This artificial comedy tradition. Because you have to be writing, for one thing, about a segment of society where everybody is interested in and observes manners, possibly relates them to morals and ethics. And so that means you have to be conservative in the sense that anything doesn't go.
No, that's for sure.
Definitely not. And you are also writing about people who are highly articulate and intelligent, who really think about cultural things. But of course, plenty of people who do that who are not Harvard Republicans.
Most people who do that aren't. No, this is the world that he's placing us in.
Grant him his world.
This film obviously doesn't have any kind of overt politics, and most of his films don't. It really just winds up being a case where he is presenting a best case scenario for...
preppies. Wealthy preppies.
It's the same old thing, but it's always because, he hasn't done that many movies, and almost all of them really succeed in making me like these characters and care about them for the length of the film. Now, their counterparts in real life, I would hope that I would still be able to like these people, but it doesn't mean that I think that they should exist as a class.
This movie doesn't necessarily think they should.
They're there for now, and let's take them at face value and see what value they have.
But of course, again, the relationship this movie has to any kind of reality is only remote and glancing.
And yeah, and of course, you see that Whit Stillman here in 2011 is, if you want to put his politics on a spectrum, he's definitely like a never-Trumper. He wants to defend this elite class, but it doesn't have to be all white people or anything. Like, he's taking steps to try to make that...
Oh yeah, he's deliberately multicultural, this film. Yeah,
exactly. So
he did, did you see his viral Twitter moment during the recent Black Lives Matter activity?
No.
On Twitter, he had a viral moment where he posted a tweet with a photo of some graffiti on a wall that said, "Kill all Whits." And his tweet said, "I have been expecting this."
Oh, God.
It was retweeted, as far as I could tell, mostly by, well, it was actually a Bernie person retweeted it. Like, one of the ex-Bernie campaign people retweeted it, so it was taken as comic relief at a tense moment.
Yeah.
It was funnier knowing his full background, though.
So he's definitely on the side that just thinks we can preserve all of the class system that America has had in place since its inception, but broaden it so that it can be more representative.
Yeah, so one of the projects he has been working on for a few years, trying to get off the ground, that I never, ever want to see, is doing a movie about the Maoist revolution.
Yeah, that can't be
The Cultural
good.
Revolution.
Because that obviously would be some kind of pointed attack on... I don't want to see anything about what Whit Stillman thinks.
Well, socialism as the destruction of all good cultural things from the past.
Exactly.
It's too... You know what? The problem is not that it would be anti-socialist. The problem is that it would be too on the nose for him to even do anything with it.
No, it would be
'Cause
too
that's already,
polemical.
It's already his subject.
It would just be Orwellian nonsense. That's what it would be.
Yeah. And anyway, if you want to attack that sort of cultural revolution thinking in North America, it's the people who are not economic socialists who are engaging in it.
Yeah.
Anyhow, and they do not have the support of the government currently, so it's not really anything we need to worry about. It's just Twitter.
No. Let's talk about the structure of the film.
We're introduced at the same time to the newcomer and the insider.
Exactly.
This movie has one of each two. So Greta Gerwig's character, the so-called self-named Violet Wister, that's a very Firbankian. She's chosen, like, that could be a name from a Firbank novel that she's chosen for herself.
Right. Her real name is Emily Tweeter, we find out much later.
I have never, like, this was the first thing that struck me about this movie. I have never seen a female character like this in any other movie. She is, well, she initially seems to be, and in a sense she is, throughout, completely self-confident. She has thought everything through for herself, and she has a full-blown, interconnected, complex, and idiosyncratic worldview that determines both her attitudes and her actions. And she takes action based on it throughout the movie. You hardly ever see any kind of character like this, let alone a woman. She is completely self-determining. I just instantly related to it as I had a personality somewhat like this in high school.
Okay.
Including sort of ostentatiously taking people under my wing and trying to take care of them and guide them, even though I was obviously a loser and a nut job, as Greta Gerwig is ultimately revealed to be. But I didn't think of myself that way. I thought of myself as competent and confident and someone who could help and protect others.
That's a very Austenian...
Well, that's Emma.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? So this is kind of an adaptation of Emma, too.
The way any other movie with this setup, you would be expecting to follow Lily and identify with Lily all the way through. And she's meeting these three girls that are going to show her the ropes, and she's going to find out things about them, maybe, but it's always going to be, what does she think of them? And what do we think of how she's interacting with them?
But it's not. It's a double vision the whole way through.
Or it really starts to tip away from her. And she becomes a character who is on a different plane from them, as she just doesn't,
she doesn't get it.
No, it gets stated fairly plainly that whatever she thought she was getting involved with those guys, no, she's realized that she's actually a lot cooler than they are.
Well, that's one of the most original things about the movie, that the person who should be representing the ordinary, normal viewer viewpoint rejects the eccentric characters.
But the film does not. It embraces it
But the film embraces them,
wholeheartedly.
but it's also not bitter about her rejection.
No.
They're allowed to go their separate ways.
Well, that's pretty common in Whit Stillman as well. You get a lot of oddball characters who clash, at least in terms of their worldviews or their ideas about conduct, but generally there is a kind of camaraderie between all of these disparate characters anyway. Like, think of all the people at the end of Last Days of Disco going to the unemployment office together.
All of the conservatives and all the neoliberals were always saying, why can't we just allow each other to have different points of view and just like each other as the people that we are, you know?
Oh
and
yeah,
just,
that's obviously
just
what...
discuss these things in a civil way. Well, Stillman is actually creating a world which is not our world in which that could happen.
Yeah, well, sure, because none of these characters is actually going to be in charge of how much tax gets imposed on rich people.
Right.
That's where you can't just
Or whether
agree to disagree anymore. Someone gets taxed or doesn't, and that's it.
Or whether police or prison abolition actually happens or not, or, you know,
right.
any of that.
In this realm of discussion, of course, yeah, the Habermasian realm, anything is on the table, and why not just throw it all in there and talk about it and see where we all come out. We're told a lot of things about Seven Oaks, which is supposed to be some kind of analog of an Ivy League, a bunch of different Ivy League schools, I guess. I don't know. It's founded in 1798. It's certainly not Harvard, but I guess it's supposed to be somewhat inspired by his experiences. It does create its own world. This is a world where instead of Greek letter fraternities, they have Roman letter fraternities, Latin.
I don't think we know any Greeks.
Did you know that expression when you first saw this movie?
No, but you can pretty
are...
quickly guess, and I think I have heard it before in various college movies that I accidentally watched.
The first time I ever heard it, really, to register it anyway, was when I was teaching at Michigan State. First day of class, after class, a girl came up to tell me that she was sorry, but she was going to have to miss next class because it was Greek initiation. And I was like, what? What does that mean? And she had to explain it to me. Maybe I would have put it together if I'd had a little time, that, yeah, they're all Phi Delta Gammas or whatever. But they don't have that at this school. They have all Roman numerals and letters. So
Greta Gerwig and her companions, they're... of which I have to single out her sort of right-hand man, Rose, played by Megalyn Achikwenwoke.
Yeah, she was amazing.
She was awesome. She really makes the movie as Greta Gerwig's double act.
Yeah.
Basically. Sadly, her career doesn't seem to have gone much of anywhere. She seems like a hard-working actress, though, on TV and voice work.
Well, hopefully there's still time, because, yeah, she gives a tremendous performance as well.
And so their mission in life is to, or Gerwig's, and everyone else is just kind of going along with her.
Well, no, I think that Heather character, she is really just like, whatever you guys want to do, I'm fine with it. But Rose definitely seems to have her own worldview that it overlaps enough with Violet that they can work together, but they're quite opposed on a lot of things. And she's
more pragmatic and realistic.
And she's got a lot of ideas about operator playboys and
confidence tricksters.
Greta Gerwig doesn't feel that way about these kinds of people at all. She's very sentimental about operators, and
but
she feels like they're needed.
They all agree that they should use the power that they feel that they wield to help students overcome depression, basically. The amount of suicide humor in this movie, I think that this has got to be an allusion to, although I don't think Beerbohm's name is on that blackboard in the Dandy class, but Max Beerbohm's Zelika Dobson.
Okay.
A novel from the Dandy era, a comic novel set at Oxford, Cambridge, something that's supposed to be one or both of them, about the most beautiful girl in the world comes to one of those big league British universities and causes mass suicide. And all of the students fall in love with her to the point where she becomes just completely bored by it as a phenomenon.
When is that from?
Late 19th century.
Okay.
I think he was in the same circles as Oscar Wilde. Anyway, it was a novel that I read during the same period as a teenager, and I even performed a scene from it. The scene where Zelika Dobson herself falls in love with the only student on campus who has not fallen in love with her, even though he's like a gross loser.
Right, okay. They do help anyone that comes to the Suicide Prevention Center, but other than that, their main mission is to go to frat parties and try to help these moronic boys who have not matured at all and are in need of guidance.
Yeah, and the movie's idea is that, the only problem with extremely wealthy frat boy types who are going to get a free ride through life, which the movie has no illusions about, is that they are stupid. And that is responsible for, I guess, their poor sexual choices, their poor political choices.
Yeah.
but we need to pity them and take care of them.
Yeah, and
those of us who are more enlightened.
Right, and this is, if you take this into the real world, this becomes horrible. It becomes the guy on Twitter complaining about discrimination against straight white men.
Oh, but the movie's funnier than that. The
Well,
movie's
of course.
wittier than that.
Yeah, I know, and it actually does make these guys kind of lovable, especially Thor, who is on a lifelong mission to learn the colors.
They're all like Jeb Bushes. Or all of the Bushes.
Except actually lovable. Also, Greta Gerwig makes no bones about the fact that the way her cosmology is set up at the beginning of the film, it's very reassuring, comforting, grounding to be in a relationship with someone that you know can't possibly do better than you. Now, that all gets taken away from her anyway.
It does. But she had real feelings for this guy.
She had the feeling of security in which that could develop because she never thought this guy was going to go anywhere else.
Love can cross the boundaries of intelligence, she tells Rose.
Yeah, that's right.
Those are the two that really get into the platonic dialogues about worldviews.
There are a lot of other things going on. Lily has had a kind of summer flirtation with a graduate student. I guess he is going to that school too, because he's on the campus. But he is living with another woman, so it's never gone any further, and this is a kind of weird situation for her. She hangs out as a third wheel with them a lot at the beginning.
But then the Playboy operator kind of pushes things further with that situation because he orders some drinks that makes the French guy, what's his name?
Xavier.
Oh, of course it is. Xavier makes him jealous. And makes his girlfriend jealous.
So that does definitely light a fire under all of these simmering pots.
The movie is overtly episodically structured.
Yeah, it is.
It's
not exactly clear
se.
how long is passing between each scene, but definitely we're getting deep into the school year and people are getting to know each other very well. She moves in with them on the first day.
Lily does.
Yeah, exactly. So our foursome are all together, just as they are in Loser, actually. Set up and ready to face the school year, but it obviously goes very different ways in the two films. The shifting around really gets going, as you say, with Fred, who initially introduces himself as Charlie.
Charlie, the strategic development guy.
Yep, strategic development analytics, I think his company is called, but it's not a company. He doesn't work there. He's going to the teacher's ed college that's next door. All the characters that we like the best in this movie have totally constructed identities, we find out. This is not long after this, we find out for the first time that Greta Gerwig, her character is not really named Violet Wister, it's Emily Tweeder. We also hear much later in the film that Rose, you just accept her throughout the film as, okay, well, she must have grown up in England, but no.
Well, except that it does come up when she says that she's known Emily
since
Violet
grade.
Since 7th grade.
Yeah, but before that. Because you could still have a British accent if you were 12 when you moved to the United States from England.
Yeah, it did raise some questions for me, though.
Yeah, well, it turns out that she spent 4 weeks in England, and she loved swinging London so much that she came back with a totally different accent and has never dropped it. So she's crazy, too.
Do you remember what rationale the movie gives Fred for constructing this Charlie identity?
I just think he thinks it's more interesting than a guy who's been going to teacher's college for 8 years, he said.
Strategic development.
Yeah.
And suits.
Exactly.
And the kind of guy who, sends drinks to a girl's table.
The way Greta Gerwig interprets it, he's got aspirations. He wants to be this strategic development analyst, and he gets halfway there by just conjuring up that situation in words, and she is charmed by that immediately. Well, Lily is disgusted because it's some kind of weird confidence game from her perspective.
Well, at a certain point, she just starts interpreting everything that is eccentric about these characters as craziness, because we do find out that Greta Gerwig has had mental illness.
Yes.
She has had OCD, although nobody calls it that.
No.
Even though they would clearly know what it was, but we hear about her the strange compulsions she had when she was younger and the way that she was bullied and tormented by her schoolmates. And it is interesting the way that Gerwig herself, as a performer, has this capability to suggest someone who is really cool and confident and, this sort of dazzling personality that she does in Frances Ha, but she can also at the same time suggest somebody who is a nerd and a loser.
Yeah. No,
it could go either way for her.
No, she is a really unique actress
that
I guess is
Catherine Hepburnish that way, or
yeah, polarizing. Obviously, there are a lot of people that just at some point stopped liking her or never liked her, and a lot of people, maybe even those same people, have gotten on board with her as a director.
Maybe works in this movie and probably turned off a lot of audience members and critics, a lot of viewers in general, is that it allows this character to be grating and the actress to be grating.
Yeah.
And that is exactly, it's like Margaret Sullivan in Shop Around the Corner. That's exactly what I like about it.
Well, me too. I love it.
Although she's not at all grating in the same way. Margaret Sullivan is very mean in Shop Around the Corner.
No, she's exactly the reverse. She is too understanding of just about everything.
And she takes every criticism of herself and really owns it and
I want to thank you for that. Yeah, and she's not being ironic about that.
She's a real nerd.
An incredible creation. Without the actress there to play that character, it could have been a disaster.
Yeah, absolutely. So yes, they are trying to save people from depression with donuts, coffee, talk, understanding, and
tap dancing.
Tap dancing.
And other forms of dance. She says it's not just tap dancing, it's all the great forms of dance. Now, Damsels in Distress, it becomes very clear by the end that this is a very pointed allusion, because the song that they sing is from the Fred Astaire, Joan Fontaine film, A Damsel in Distress.
Oh, I don't even know this film, so
I like that movie.
About it.
It's a very underseen film and discounted film because it's the one that Fred Astaire made in the 1930s without Ginger Rogers. George Stevens directed it. It's certainly not as great as something like Roberta or Top Hat, but I think it's a really good movie that deserves to be seen. It's true that Joan Fontaine has no musical talent whatsoever, so it's a bit weird that she's in it, but she kind of traipses after him as he dances. But it's a lovable film. It has a good Gershwin score, and obviously Whit Stillman has affection for it if he alluded to it this hard in the title and with that big ending number.
So this is really, in part at least, a movie where Stillman is kind of examining his own obsessions.
Yeah.
And his own idiosyncratic personality. It's interesting to compare it because we already noted that there's a certain resemblance with Austen's Emma, right? So it's interesting to think of it in conjunction with Clueless, which also has characters who allude to the past, to culture from the past, to old movies and things like that. But mainly I don't even remember what he's called in the movie, if he's still called Frank, but mainly it's the analog for the Frank Churchill character who does that in Clueless, the one who turns out to be gay. So it's kind of a specialized thing that only gay guys can do in high school. Only gay guys dress sharply and take an interest in old culture. But this is something that attracts the Emma character to him. So in a way, she is also interested in that past, but she can only sort of gain access to it through him as her guide. And it turns out that can't include sex and romance. But here, the main female character is the one who has these obsessions herself.
Her most cherished ambition is to start an international dance craze that people remember for decades or centuries to come, and she's very well read on previous phenomena of this type. She knows the facts about the Charleston, which nobody knows.
But I think there's a footnote at the end of the movie that suggests that she got everything she said there wrong.
But in the world of the movie, she's right.
There's a very, very, very nerdy joke in there, if you caught it, which is confusing Richard Strauss with Johann, when usually people do it the opposite way.
Right.
So only someone who knew who Richard Strauss is watching this movie would be able to get that joke before the footnote.
I'm pretty sure that Chubby Checker's real name isn't Chubber Checker, but in the world of the movie it is.
All of that was made up. So she gets everything wrong, but she sounds very authoritative.
She does.
But the movie does actually allude to this, well, through the dandy class, but also the discussion that she and Fred have about it, that Violet and Fred have about the class and about the literature and about homosexuality.
Oh, yeah.
Touches on the fact that there's no real cultural referent for people who have this kind of obsession, whether men or women, if they aren't gay. And I've heard this movie referred to as homophobic because of that little scene.
Well, I can see why someone who is gay might think of it that way.
Or someone who's concern trolling.
I feel like there's room for honest offense to take at that. Doesn't damage my opinion of the film. I still love it. But I can see why anyone who thinks that that statement is being taken at face value, that the only reason to be gay is to be part of this really interesting creative class.
Yeah, but of course I have heard gay men who are also writers make those very comments themselves.
Yeah.
And even argue that there's at least always going to be some vestige of that cultural investment in gay culture. Okay, I'm talking about my friend Mark Simpson again. Sometimes I bring him up, the journalist, simply because homosexuals are always going to be a minority, and therefore gay men have formed their own culture, and there is a sort of cultural transmission within the gay scene.
Sure.
That will probably be ongoing.
Well, subcultures, that's how they work.
Yeah, just because you need something to bolster your identity when you're always going to be a sexual minority, whether you're in a tolerant society or not.
But Mark Simpson, he's definitely an exponent of the idea that it was a tragic mistake to aim for marriage equality and all of that stuff, because it does damage the subcultural aspect.
Yeah, so being gay is now, I mean, you're aiming for acceptance, and that's a good thing on a human level, the reduction of human suffering. At the same time, it may mean that your cultural identity is no longer transgressive, and therefore of less interest to the rest of us.
Yeah, well, we've talked about this in a totally different context, where we describe 1930s movies and the roles that women get to play in them as very interesting in a lot of ways because of the limits on women in real life.
Yeah, because women get to represent something that is symbolically transgressive.
So
right?
yeah, the aesthetic and the political really don't mix very well in a lot of cases. And again, this is another one of them, I think. So if you're thinking primarily on a political plane, the statements made in this film are homophobic for sure.
I do find it interesting that Fred says he's not especially gay.
Yeah, no, that was nice, right? So
a little bit of room for flexibility there.
And he's a great character. I really like him. I mean, he's very much in the tradition of, there's always one character at least like this in Whit Stillman's movies, who winds up being a possible love interest for a few different women and gets to say a lot of things that you pretty much know are Whit Stillman's actual thoughts.
As we've said, this movie doesn't have a plot, and it's very episodic, and so much of it, the effect of it is just the precise way in which the lines are written and delivered. I don't think we should really use our usual method with it. I want to dig some more into this homosexuality and culture thing, then move into the movie's treatment of sex, and through that, maybe we can dig a little deeper into what's going on with Greta Gerwig's character through talking about, what does ethics and what do sexual ethics mean in Stillman's movies.
Sure.
So in terms of the gay culture thing, it's only mentioned in passing in this one scene, but it's also implicit in the dandy literature class, which is the context in which it comes up. Certainly the prism through which I came to be an aesthete as a teenager. I thought of myself as one, and as a college student too, certainly as an undergraduate for many years, that was my identity. I thought of myself as an apolitical aesthete. But, not being as wealthy and out of touch as Whit Stillman, all of that changed for me due to my own personal economic circumstances, shifts in the North American political climate. So I've acquired politics over time, but my preferred identity was certainly as an aesthete. I would have loved to just keep that going for the rest of my life. So yeah, I gained my own appreciation of culture to a large extent through reading about the history of gay male culture and aestheticism and participation in culture, right?
Mm-hmm.
Funnily enough, when I met my husband in my late teens, that was what we connected over. Basically hit all of my gay male cultural reference points in our very first discussion. And he knew all of them. And to the point where I assumed he was gay, as many people do when they first meet him. We kind of bonded over that we were both culturally gay men without that being possible in any literal sense. Well, I mean, it was possible for him. And I think he would say the same thing that Fred says about being not especially gay.
Right.
But then we get into the movie's actual treatment of sex. Like, everything in a Stillman movie just belongs particularly to his own, like he has this one worldview that has all of these boxes that are only his own boxes that get ticked off in every movie, right? And it's a jumble of things that don't intuitively belong together. Like this concern with, well, it's even in the title of this movie, this concern with women's virtue.
Sure.
And this movie handles that better, I think, than his earlier movies do, in that there's no slut-shaming.
Well, but again, I think in the earlier films, he's going with the Austenian tradition, where there is a woman who is horribly compromised by some kind of Don Juan figure, usually, and that is the locus of the villainy, and there's a woman that's damaged by it. In this film, all of that is gone, which is good.
Yeah, but there's some literal, I think it might be in Metropolitan, there's some literal slut-shaming, too, where the women who sleep around are
sure.
commented on by the men, and, well, I don't think the full force of the film is behind the men's shaming.
No, it's not.
It's not, but it's also not completely dismissed.
Of course, if you're going to have a world in which having sex with a man who doesn't want to marry you winds up destroying your life, then anytime a woman has sex, it's a big deal in that world, and he's still in that world in his 90s films for the most part.
But what's interesting about that is, I mean, I have some sympathy for his interest in the virtuous heroine. I just don't think it's developed in a very mature way in his earlier films.
No.
In that, what's attractive about that type of character, and I mean, this relates to maybe in a vague way to our discussions of the Setsuko Hara characters, especially in her Ozu films, the Noriko characters, not doing a lot of bed hopping in this modern way that is so distasteful to Whit Stillman, at least when women do it. In literature, it can mean a character who just takes herself more seriously, who is just more thoughtful about everything.
Yeah, like
basically.
a Dorothea Brooke.
Yeah, Dorothea Brooke and Isabel Archer, the whole Harold Bloom heroines of the Protestant will English novel tradition.
Yeah.
It's only the English novel. The French women don't think about things the same way. The Russian women don't think about things the same way. It's very much a British inheritance, a certain type of ethics. So I am sympathetic to that. I also liked that about Heckerling's Clueless, to have a character who is proudly a virgin, but not in that movie, not at all for ethical reasons. She just has the confidence to only have sex when she feels like she wants to have it.
It's always the way it should be, right? I mean,
yeah, and that is not the way that it is in high school.
No, I imagine not. I mean, I have no experience with sex in high school, so I can't comment, but...
Well, I mean, I definitely, like, all of my friends had sex while we were still in high school, and with varying degrees of seeming like it was something they actually wanted to do.
It was definitely something I wanted to do.
But there was either pressure coming from the boys, or there was just pressure that this was the thing that people did.
Yeah.
And because I was very eccentric and very neurotic, I didn't feel that pressure. So I waited a long time. It's just interesting. It's an interesting possibility to have open for your character, that they will give this some consideration rather than it just being obligatory that the character will have a sex life.
Sure.
Do you see what I mean? It's just a more interesting aesthetic choice.
But that's not what this film is like, really.
No, I'm just setting up the background of Stillman's ethics concerning sex.
Because Lily definitely is not someone who has avoided sex. We get the sense that she's had sex before, and now she gets involved with Xavier once he gets rid of his live-in girlfriend, and he reveals that he is a follower of the Cathar faith.
So this all seems like...
I don't know if those are real Cathar ideas either, right? I mean, I know a bit about the Cathars, but mainly about the crusade to stamp them out. I don't really know that much about what kind of practices they had and whether they were exclusively into anal sex.
This all seems like he has set this whole thing up as an elaborate story and smokescreen just to get girls to have anal sex with him. And this was just when this movie was made. I think it was kind of like at the height of the whole, oh, look at all the heterosexual people, all they'll do is anal. Like that was a thing. That was a real thing in the culture.
Okay.
Mark Simpson wrote a lot about it. The heterosexual obsession with anal sex.
Okay.
That was a real cultural thing for a long time. But then it turns out he actually believes this
Well,
stuff.
he may have devised it as a scheme, and then he converted himself or something, right? Because, yeah, he does hold it sacred, and when it's cheapened by a flyer by the ALA, I guess the Anal Love Association, that must be what it stands for. They never say what it stands for.
Oh, I was going to look that up. I guess it's not a real thing.
Well, I don't know. My assumption is that it's not a real thing that gets handed out on campuses, but maybe it is. Anyway, either way, it's not religious. It has no spiritual component. It's just hedonism, and he flips out on her.
Yeah. So anyway, there's a moment afterwards when she reveals all of this to her friend group, including Jimbo.
Yeah.
Where it's this very Stillman-esque moment where everyone feels very bad, like she has been
violated.
And I mean, there is a violation involved here, which is that she didn't want to do this. She is only doing this because it's his face.
Yeah, but he didn't coerce her.
No, but we see that there is a discomfort.
Oh yeah, well, she's making a compromise here for sure. But again, that's part of agency, I imagine. I don't feel like the film is saying that, oh, poor Lily, she's been taken advantage of.
But I think it is a little. Like, that note is there. That note is, like, actually sounded out loud.
Yeah, but Jimbo's point of view, I don't think, is the overall point of view of the film. It's
maybe.
one
It would have been.
thread.
It would have been in another.
It's the Taylor
Stillman.
Nichols character, right? Who shows up as the professor later. He's like the ultra-moralist.
Anyway, regardless of how much agency she has, the point is that she doesn't want to keep doing this.
No,
and the relationship is going to have to change.
Yeah, but she's really, like, the other thing is that, yeah, obviously she's trying to get into it, because she says, let's go to a meeting, this is for our people, like, we love anal sex, or we're trying to. And he's like, no, we're not going to this disgusting meeting. These people are pigs. They're not doing it for the right reason.
And of course, all of the hilarity of this is the way that everyone avoids saying anal sex in the most elaborate way possible. Not from the front way, the traditional front way. The Cathar way is from behind.
Yes. Sex with a condom would be a mockery of the procreative act.
A parody, yeah.
Blaze a new path.
Anyway, if you find it absolutely hilarious to have the cultural issue of anal sex, of women doing anal sex for their boyfriends, treated in such a white glove manner as it is in this movie, and like many minutes of joke, then this is the humor for you.
And again, apologies to any Cathars who might be listening who perhaps might have more insight on this and tell us that this has nothing to do with the Albigensian path.
And apologies for any men or women who are listening who enjoy anal sex. I'm sure that there's plenty of that.
Yeah. No, Whit Stillman thinks that this is fodder for gentle humor.
Okay, so what is going on with Greta Gerwig's character? So the thing, as we started by saying, that is very undecadent of Stillman and very un-Firbank-like, not very much like the English comedy tradition that he's part of, except someone like Jane Austen, is this sense of the ethical. And I guess something you could say about this movie is that even though it manages to insert that, so to speak, Austenian concern with ethics into a totally artificial Firbankian world.
Well, ethics in this movie really come down to what can you do to prevent the self-destruction of your fellow human beings.
And it came out of a place of Gerwig's character being very self-destructive herself.
Yeah, it doesn't have any strong prescriptions other than to be attentive, just sort of like Dan Aykroyd. Be interested in people and be alert to the signs that they may be about to go completely off the rails, and try to pull them back or get them to learn something that might help them, like the colors of the rainbow.
And even if they might end up betraying you, like that girl.
Frank.
Like that girl does.
Oh, yeah. Pris, that Greta Gerwig helps. She ends up with Frank,
causing terrible heartache to Greta Gerwig, but she isn't blamed for it.
No, Greta Gerwig is all forgiving.
Violet is just too big a person for any of this, even though she suffers. And suffers and suffers.
Yeah, so again, if you came to this movie expecting it to be a satire, well, it would be, okay, well, let's look at Greta Gerwig's character through the eyes of Lily, and we're going to see, okay, she's not as self-confident as she seemed, but, we're going to look at that in a kind of incisive way that cuts this kind of person down to size. No, she just gets more and more immense as a character as it goes along.
And that's another thing that Stillman achieves here in terms of that particular tradition is that he combines the Emma character with the Fanny Price character, which is done in an atrocious way in Patricia Rozima's Mansfield Park. But this is a way to do that, which should be impossible, that's very interesting. That she has all of the milk of human kindness and self-effacingness of the Fanny Price character with this narcissism and confidence and assertion of the Emma Woodhouse character, which is very much a heroine of the Protestant will type of thing.
And this is not something that Stillman had always done, right? Because the analog character to what you think the Gerwig character is going to be in Last Days of Disco, for sure, is the Beckinsale character, but she doesn't have that multivalence to her. And they do both get combined, as you say, in this film. So it's a major advance.
It is a major advance.
Although I love Last Days of Disco. It does other things.
Oh yeah, no, that earlier trilogy is great, but I feel like this movie is a philosophical advance. It's an aesthetic advance. It's an advance in terms of gender.
Yeah.
Obviously. He has never had a movie that only has female point of view characters, let alone the sole protagonist.
Probably, I guess. No, I mean, I do think of Last Days of Disco as primarily about Beckinsale and Sevigny, but it's true, there are a lot of male characters that get more time than the male characters get in this one. Although in this one, Fred does come in for that sort of treatment by the second half of the film.
True.
I mean, Frank remains a moron from beginning to end, a doofus.
But I guess maybe it stands out for me just because there is this whole foursome unit that we follow throughout the entire film. And the fact that Gerwig, it's not, as you said, it's not just that Violet is a protagonist, it's that she is the writer-director's spokesperson.
Yeah, it's really...
Not his only spokesperson.
No.
Because they're all his spokespersons. Oh, I wonder what he was thinking when he spelled doofy with an O-U. What's that all about?
I think there's just a lot...
Just for fun?
It's just more Tarantino alternate history stuff. Suppose the language had developed in a different way. But so much better than Tarantino's alternate history stuff.
Well, what else do you want to say about the movie? The musical numbers are, of course, delightful and moving.
Really are, because it really does make you feel how important this stuff is to Gerwig's sanity and potentially to everyone around them if they can catch what she has. And likewise with the soap, the aromatherapy aspect of the film, which is, of course, on one level treated very jokily, but on another level I think is quite sincere, that these kinds of stimuli can make a huge difference in a person's well-being.
Well, okay, so there's a lot of talk in the movie about... They call themselves Christians at various points.
Judeo-Christians, anyway.
Right.
She corrects herself.
My point is that the things that are found to live for in this movie are, well, they're all aesthetic, and they're all obviously secular, and they're all, I don't know what to call it, minor? Small?
When it comes down to it, he's not so dissimilar from Woody Allen, right? Like when he's...
Oh, yeah, I hope so, because I despise Woody Allen.
In Manhattan, when he goes through the things that make life meaningful, they're the same kinds of things.
It's illustrated through this character. It's not just a trite statement.
I'm not saying that it's the same, but it's the same kinds of things. But yeah, he embodies it so much more. It's not just someone talking to a dictaphone.
And this is vastly different from his other films, that he has created this character just in order to embody those qualities. She's almost like a successful Mr. Deeds or something. And the suicide threat is just as potent and real and felt in this movie, despite the hilarious slapstick manner in which it's treated.
The epidemic of suicide attempts going on at the school next door, the teacher's college, where they keep flinging themselves off the second floor so nobody succeeds in killing themselves, but they destroy their lives forever. Yeah, there are stakes here, and Thor is the one that is most in danger of this, and we get like the climactic moment. They think he's running to be the next lemming off the balcony, but instead he is just looking for the perfect vantage point from which to identify all the colors of the rainbow spectrum. And it is an epiphany for him. And he gets together with Heather on the balcony as well, as she exults with him.
This movie has a extraordinarily capacious worldview. I was just trying to think as you were talking, and I was thinking about that scene where all the Roman number fraternity guys are dressed in their togas, and they're all pumping and fighting each other and whatever the hell else they're doing, and Gerwig is sitting back and watching them approvingly, even as she says that, yes, the civilization should probably be destroyed, and will be.
Rose just thinks it's disgusting.
Yeah, but I was trying to think, that made me think of the statement, the world is only justified as an aesthetic phenomenon. I think that's Nietzsche. I was trying to think who it was, and I think that's Nietzsche. We don't normally agree with Nietzsche on this podcast, but on aesthetics, sometimes maybe.
I tend to agree with Nietzsche on everything that he took from Emerson, which is a lot, which is most.
Like, I really think that this movie, its worldview is that vast. Like, it's really operating on that kind of philosophical plane, thinking about how this world that is so terrible, including its terrible class system, how this world is justified and what is the healthiest attitude that you can take toward it.
It's a very rewarding film. Now, if it changes your point of view to voting Republican, then you've taken the wrong things from it. I don't think you need to take that step in order to love it.
Well, you don't need to take that step watching Frank Capra films either.
No, of course not. Is that our final statement on Damsels in Distress for now?
Yeah, I think so.
The other parallel, we have talked about the Gershwin song in this film. In Loser, we also have a breaking into song. The Best Things in Life Are Free, from an old show. It's from Good News, which was made into a film a couple of times. So just another little romantic comedy. Obviously, it's something that's baked into the genre, that there's a wistful attitude towards the past in most of these films.
Well, yeah, there's this strange idea that romance belongs to the past.
Yeah.
That romance is retro. That the movies themselves, like from the 1930s, say, the era of Hollywood romantic comedy, those movies were extremely modern. There was certainly no sense in those movies that romance belongs to the past, so I don't know.
Well, they did it so well, I guess, that for some reason they've convinced all the succeeding generations that movie love does belong somewhere back there in the 30s.
Well, I guess it's like Stendhal says, we only learn how to love from novels, and now we only learn how to love from 1930s romantic comedies, if love in a particular way.
Or we only learn how to tell love stories in movies from the 30s, it seems, anyway.
Yeah.
In real life, it may be very different. So next week, Elise?
Yeah, what's next week?
RKO, 1933. This is where RKO really starts to seem like RKO, I think. We're going to be talking about Morning Glory, Katharine Hepburn's big Oscar win, first Oscar win.
Well, I don't even know if I've ever seen it.
I really like it.
Okay.
It's not one of her most beloved films, and I don't think it measures up to things like Alice Adams, but I think we'll have some good talks about it, and Katharine Hepburn is always welcome, and this will be our first dip into, well, we'll be revisiting her a lot in the years to come in RKO, because she's a central figure there. The other movie is a movie I haven't seen, and I guess you haven't either, Our Betters, directed by George Cukor. I don't know anything else about it, but we'll all know a lot more in 1 week's time.
Wow, so this is a real rolling of the dice Studios Year by Year episode then.
Well, we've done that before a lot of
times.
times.
And we're going to do it again. In fact, we almost kind of prefer that, but it's been a while. Mostly been doing films that are familiar to us, or at least to you. So yeah, this will be interesting.
See you there.